Hello, my name is Michael Jenkins, and I'm the guilty party responsible for Wall Street Raider. I chuckle when I get emails from customers who ask me when the team is going to do one thing or the other. Well, the team is me. Running software is definitely a one-horse operation and always has been since I started self-publishing in 1990. For those of you who've been playing Wall Street Raider for any length of time, I want to say thank you. You are a terrific bunch of people. Anyone like store clerks who has to deal with the public regularly will usually find that the world seems to be full of very rude, often unpleasant people. But the people who play Wall Street Raider seem to be a special lot. Over my nearly 40 years of interacting with thousands of you, responding to questions or help requests, I have to say that at least 99% of those interactions have been very positive and often downright enjoyable. So I just want to express my gratitude to so many of you who have supported the development of the game by buying it and buying updates, and have also offered me help and advice in the process in many ways, which has also been greatly appreciated. I think one reason people appreciate Wall Street Raider so much stems from the fact that I'm not your typical software coder or game developer. For one thing, while I've had several careers since I graduated from Harvard Law School in 1969 as an economics consultant with a national consulting firm, as a CPA with the world's largest accounting firm in their Los Angeles office, as a tax lawyer with a very large San Francisco law firm, and also as the author of a million-selling series of books for all 50 of the states, like starting and operating a business in California, starting and operating a business in New York, Texas, etc. I've also had a lot of writing experience during that time, which was also helpful, considering how much text there is in Raider, which you'll have noticed if you've played it long enough. My experience in all of those different disciplines gave me a unique background for creating what I think is a highly realistic corporate financial simulation, since I spent years as a lawyer and CPA putting together billion-dollar mergers and all kinds of other very complex corporate financial transactions and strategies. On the other hand, when it came to writing software, I'm a total amateur, and it shows, I think. I've had zero education or training with regard to software or computers of any kind. What I did is I simply bought one of the early K-Pro personal computers back in 1983 with about a 5-inch screen like this, and running the old CP/M operating system that preceded MS-DOS. And I basically learned how to program in BASIC in one night from a little booklet from Microsoft. Thank you, Bill Gates. But by 1984, I built the first crude version of Wall Street Raider, which actually had a moving stock ticker and scrolling news headlines on the little K-Pro screen, as it has in all the later versions. And by 1986, MS-DOS had come out, and IBM released a basic compiler program. So I talked my book publisher into publishing it for me, which he did. In fact, he managed to sell several thousand copies before he finally lost interest in it by 1990. Which is when I got the rights back and started self-publishing my software. As a kid, I was always a big fan of Monopoly, which is kind of what got me started on this track. And even before personal computers existed, while I was still in law school, I started filling up notebooks in my spare time with all these ideas about how to create a computer game, somewhat like Monopoly, but instead of hotels and railroads, I wanted to make it a stock market game. So as you can see, once I taught myself the rudiments of basic programming, my vision for a game got a little out of hand. It just kind of kept going. Initially, with the DOS game, my ideas for the game were somewhat cramped by the limitations of the software back in those days. And I had to break Raider up into several small programs to make it work. But every few years, thanks to Moore's law and the doubling of the processing power of the latest machines, I was eventually able to add more and more features to what was originally just a corporate finance game within a simulated stock market and economy. So over the years, I added put and call options, commodity futures, interest rate swap derivatives, ETFs, and eventually cryptocurrencies as investment classes that players could utilize in their financial empire building strategies, which is what I think turns people on when they're playing it, to see that empire grow and grow. I actually retired at the tender age of 42 from law and CPA practice back in 1986 to devote full time to my starting and operating a business book series, which I had begun publishing in 1980, as I mentioned earlier. And Wall Street Raider was just a fun hobby or sideline that I also launched that year. Just a hobby, or as some of my friends would say, more like an obsession. So all through the 80s and 90s, I was mainly preoccupied with my tax and legal guidebooks for all 50 states. And for nearly 20 years, they were the standard texts for new and small businesses. They were featured very favorably in cover articles in Forbes and Inc. magazines, and they were used in every SBA office in the country and found in just about every library in the United States. But my book publisher, excuse me, after selling over 1 million copies of my books, about 90% of his sales, eventually decided he wasn't making enough money, so he quietly replaced all of my books with similar titles written by people he had hired so that he wouldn't have to pay me or anyone royalties. So that pretty much ended my writing career. The footnote to this little sad story is that it soon was discovered that the reason my publisher had barely broken even for the last 5 years, despite record book sales each year, was that his accountant was embezzling all of his profits. Nearly $1 million over 5 years. Well, such is life, I guess. Anyway, without a publisher, since then, I've been publishing the books as Kindle editions for a number of years, but with basically zero success, since I'm the world's worst marketer and very few people stumble across the ebooks on Amazon. But that is when I got serious about really developing and improving Wall Street Raider, and that got me motivated and got to work on it. There's so much free tax and legal information on the internet that the books like mine are largely obsolete, I've finally come to realize. But fortunately, Wall Street Raider is different. Despite the aging 1990s interface that I created and the lack of a major publisher or any kind of marketing push, people still find it and want to play the game and love it. Over the years, I've discovered that the game offers a lot more than just simple entertainment. which has been quite an eye-opener. I've received countless emails from players who are CEOs of corporations, bankers, lawyers, hedge fund managers, all saying that Wall Street Raider played a major role in shaping their careers. Some have even told me that without this game that they wouldn't be where they are today. A number of them I've heard from said they grew up very poor in third world countries and began playing the free version of Raider in their early teens, and as a result they were eventually able to parlay what they had learned into high-paying jobs with investment firms like Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs and so forth. Real rags to riches stories. I mean, really heartwarming stuff and amazing. All that from playing a game for a few years, if you can believe that. You can read a few of the excerpts from emails I've received, which I think you can see on your screen right now. Just a moment here. Anyway, the feedback I've received has been just immensely gratifying, as well as surprising. I mean, I created the game because it was fun to do so, and I thought some people beside me would also enjoy it. But I've been pleasantly surprised to see the positive impact it has had on the lives of a lot of people who grew up playing it for years and years. I know addiction to computer games is usually not a good thing, but it seems to have been beneficial in the case of Wall Street Raider. It seems like the longer people played it, the more they've learned. And in the years before I was able to get my hands on a personal computer, back in the 1960s and 70s, and start writing code, the process of figuring out the details of how all of the complex corporate transactions would have to work in this game had the same effect on me. By figuring all of that out, that taught me a lot about the mechanics of corporate finance. So I found that as soon as I went to work for big law firms and CPA firms, that I immediately became a real star because I could just effortlessly figure out all kinds of creative ways to put together complex corporate transactions. Things like LBOs, uses of options and convertible securities, spinning off subsidiaries and such. It was so easy for me because I had long since worked out all the details of how every kind of corporate transaction had to be implemented. So bottom line, my customers were not the only ones who learned a lot from this game. It was also a real boon to me in my career in tax and corporate finance. So I think you can probably understand my desire now to keep Wall Street Raider alive so it doesn't go in the box with me. I'm 80 years old, but I always say that I plan to live forever. However, that's not too likely, I'm told. A few years ago, I tried bringing it to Steam to see if they would sell it, but Steam told me it was too much of a niche game and that their audience wouldn't be interested. Besides, it had almost no graphics and it looked kind of clumsy and primitive, I guess. That has been a source of real frustration since I've seen several stock market games from big software publishers that have great flashy graphics but lack the kind of realism and depth of my game. I even licensed my code several times to larger companies who thought that they could port it to something more modern, but they were never able to get their versions to work. One outfit spent over a year and lots of money trying to create a version of it for the iPad, but they eventually gave up, saying it was just too complex for their team of programmers. They had a team of coders over in, where was it, Armenia, who were overseen by a American PhD in math. who had done software for Disney, so he was a sharp individual. But none of their people had the kind of in-depth knowledge of corporate finance, economics, law, taxation, and writing ability that I was able to build into the game. So they simply couldn't code the simulation correctly when they didn't have a clue how things should work, no matter how brilliant they happened to be as programmers. Besides my 115,000 lines of primitive basic source code, which breaks all the rules for good structured programming, was apparently indecipherable to anyone but me. Even the much simpler DOS version, which I licensed back around 1990 to Commodore computers for their game systems, was just too complex for them, and they gave up and returned my source code after about 3 months of trying to understand it without the aid of a Rosetta Stone. So I never had any luck licensing it to anyone, even when I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours consulting with their programmers. But, as fast as I found a bug, they created 10 more, so that never worked. However, January 24, a 29-year-old named Ben Ward reached out to me asking to remake the game, just as so many people had asked before. He was citing his desire to enhance it for his own enjoyment. And I explained to him that I had an oral agreement since the middle of 2023 with someone else who was also trying to modernize the Wall Street Raider user interface. And I'd given him until the end of 2024 to try to do so. But I had Ben sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, and gave him a copy of the source code to play with for his own use. However, since the other developer never delivered anything to me that I could test, I assumed that he just gave up on it. So when I finally reached out to Ben recently to see how he was doing, I was astonished to learn that he had spent the past year studying my code, and unlike all the other people who had tried and failed, he had not only figured out how to overlay a new user interface onto the old framework of game logic, but he had also reworked many of the screens and just generally made the thing a lot better. So we soon reached an agreement, and I am now delighted to announce that Wall Street Raider is finally getting its long-awaited and often requested facelift. With this remastering of the game, I'm basically passing the Wall Street Raider torch on to Ben, and I hope that its impact will endure for many more years long after I'm gone. This will be my final effort to preserve my little piece of gaming history, I suppose. Ben obviously has the skills and the passion to take Raider to places where I simply never could have gone. At one point, the challenges got so overwhelming recently that I seriously considered just shutting down everything when my e-commerce provider went bankrupt, owing me for half a year's sales, and I was having an endless series of difficulties with all the various tech firms that I have to deal with, which were just driving me up the wall. So I've often joked with Ben that I feel like a dinosaur, maybe even the oldest video game developer around. Of course, Ben quickly reminded me that Will Crowther, the original creator of Colossal Cave Adventure, is 89 years old. At 80, I'm just a spring chicken. But I guess that technically makes me the second oldest. Still, it's the passion of all the dedicated fans of Wall Street Raider out there that's kept me going and constantly taking their suggestions and stealing their ideas to try to improve the game, with a million little tweaks and some major added features over the years. It's really because of you, the players, that I'm taking this final step to ensure that Wall Street Raider endures, and I'm supporting Ben and seeing this project through. So please join Ben and me in breathing some new life into this game. This is getting exciting. This is the next chapter of the Wall Street Raider saga, and I invite you to be a part of it. My hope is that it will continue to change players' lives for the better, as it seems to have done for all of these years. So thank you all for sharing this incredible journey with me, or for those who are new to Wall Street Raider, beginning that journey. Over and out.